Hey guys, this is episode 3 of How to Be an Artist. My guest today is Kohl Glass. This is a really fun conversation. I do my best to be a good listener when I'm having these conversations, but I'm finding it's really surprising how much I miss from my guests when I actually sit down and start editing this stuff. And this conversation with Kohl was definitely one of those. A lot of really fantastic stuff. A lot of great insights I got from him in the midst of this conversation and re-listening to the conversation. So, we talk about a lot of really interesting things. The overriding theme, though, is one of thinking about what Kohl Glass calls your demons. Like in his case, it's kind of depression, but whatever these kind of negatives are in your life, and how there is a tendency to think that we need those things to create art or to create good art. And so this is a really interesting personal story from Kohl about how he kind of had that idea and how he worked through that idea and came to kind of a better place as an artist. So there's some deviations here and there. We talk about what it's like to grow up Mormon with depression and how trying to reconcile that with your spirituality within that tradition. The importance of Orson Scott Card for young Mormon artists like us. And we just talk about, again, just this idea of maturing as an artist and gaining greater insight about what it means to make art, what type of life you want to live, and being happy and a healthy person in the midst of that. So I hope you enjoy the episode. How to be an artist. Step 3, the Invincible Summer, with guest Kohl Glass. One idea from you that I really liked that you kind of shared with me is this idea from Camus. I'm not sure where this comes from, if this is from an essay he wrote or what, but you kind of shared this idea about how he said something along the lines that I find within the darkest winter that inside of me there's an invincible summer. Is that how it goes?
Yeah. And then no matter how hard the world pushes,
I push back.
The Invincible Summer pushes back just as hard.
Okay.
Something like that. That's paraphrased.
So maybe we'll start with this. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your discovery of that, how that kind of fit in with, I don't know, maybe the challenges you were kind of looking at as an artist, or even personally, how that reflected on you personally. We can kind of dive into that story, and then we can kind of see how things kind of radiate from there.
I just found the quote. It's in the midst of in the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. And that makes me happy, for it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me there's something stronger, something better pushing right back. So yeah, I had this interesting thing where I, growing up Mormon, being Mormon, I kind of felt like there needed to be a really sunshiny optimism to what I created. And it wasn't very long before I realized that just wasn't in my DNA. When I told my parents that I wanted to, I was going to go and study film, my mom got really excited and she was like, "You can make seminary videos." And I was like, "Do you know me? I've never been anyone who's ever had any interest in that. I've always just had a very dark and kind of, the grittiness of truth has always really been really appealing to me." And so as I've gone through, my career and studied my film studies and started off as a professional and everything, I kind of came to this opinion that I needed my demons to allow me to create the way that I felt, was true to me, but also to kind of put off that stereotype of Mormons being really optimistic and really Pollyannish and oh, if you're a Mormon, you're going to make a movie about, Mormonism, then it's going to be this self-congratulatory, faith promoting,
Pat on the back.
pat on the back, congratulations, you're in the right religion, all this stuff that like, you know, and it's true. Like as a Mormon filmmaker, I would talk to people, and people would have that misconception of like, oh, this is what you want to create. Then, oh, you want to create the, you want to put the Book of Mormon on celluloid or whatever. However, this thing is,
Yeah.
and again, like I had no interest in that, and so I was like, to kind of like combat that misconception, that stereotype. Like I need my demons, and my demons are
Yeah.
making me gritty. It's given me an edge, and it's given me an advantage over people who, I mean, this is kind of unfair to say, but I did literally think that it gave me an advantage over people who did want to put their testimonies out into art. And I was like, because that never felt true to me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I have this thing that's gnawing on my soul that will always allow me to tell the truth.
Do
And
you is that something that you would say is like made you feel more valid and authentic too? That you could say like this is an authentic thing. This is me. And for someone outside of the realm of Mormonism, you felt like it's something that they could respect
yeah, absolutely.
or appreciate.
Absolutely. Like I loved when, you know, I people would watch something I did and it would throw them for a curveball, and I never wanted to go and like wallow in gratuitousness. Like that's not what I wanted. But I
Yeah.
wanted to tell a truth that I felt like my culture blinded themselves to. And that was that like life is gritty, life is hard. Just because you are a member of this church doesn't mean that you don't make horrific choices that really damage other people. And that's something
Yeah.
that we never we always pretend like that doesn't happen. It's like, oh, you got baptized and now you're good. You're not
Everything's
gonna,
great.
yeah, you're not gonna hurt anybody anymore, and you're not gonna make any bad choices and everything. It's like, no, and like, what if we started talking about how where the system isn't working so well or where it doesn't work at all? And I was very
Which
interested in
is,
that kind of stuff.
by the way, I think that's like one of the things I really appreciate about the work of someone like Orson Scott Card and why he was such an important influence to me growing up
Mm.
is seeing someone that was a, active Mormon member, which in at that time it's like he's safe, but
Yeah.
then seeing him, his work has kind of this tone that pervades it of like sadness,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and it's much more of true to his work than any sort of like cheery, evangelical thing you might expect from a Mormon.
Yeah. I
Um,
I remember the first time I read Ender's Game,
mhm.
and I don't think I knew that he was a Mormon when I started reading that book. And
Hmm.
then my mom said, "Oh, that's the Mormon. Like that guy's Mormon." I'm like, "What?" And there was some mentions about Mormonism, so I'm like, "Oh, okay, 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 yeah." And then he had like some comment where it's like, "You're just a fart in the air conditioner," and I was like, "Wait, what?" Like Mormons can like I know that like my brothers and I are talking about farts, but
An
like
adult.
here's it, yeah, an adult in writing, like this is.
Yeah.
And it was funny because my teenage brain is just like, well, he must not be a very good Mormon then because he's talking about
Yeah.
farts and print. And that was, I think that was that kind of thinking that by the time I got to be creating, I was rebelling against, where it's like, yeah, guess what? Mormons are like everyone else. They
Yeah.
have every other problem that every other person has, and I'm going to show that. And a lot of my stuff isn't based on Mormonism, but I felt like, if Orson Scott Card can talk about farts in an air conditioner, then I can talk about like gritty, darker things. And
Yeah.
and I know I've made, I mean, the only people who've ever really talked to me about how they felt uncomfortable is like family members and stuff like that. But I'm also just like, for me, that just feels way more true when you look at
Yeah.
the whole picture instead of just like, hey, you know what? Let's just look at the don't look at the shadows, just look at the light part of this picture. And it's like, no, you're not looking at everything. And that was kind of where I allowed my demons to just kind of like, well, no one's looking over here, so I'm gonna point you over here, and I kind of had this thing. And it was definitely a little bit of egotism, like I was really kind of like, this is my thing and I'm gonna, whatever. And I want to be iconoclastic, but I don't want to be too iconoclastic, and I don't want to. That it was a weird journey that allowed me to kind of just leave a lot of issues in that were going on inside of me like unaddressed, because I was worried
Sure.
that if I was to address some of these issues, if I was to go to, you know, therapy or whatever and figure these things out, then suddenly I might turn around and just be like, you know what I want to do? I want to do a film version of my testimony. Like I was really afraid of that. And
it would make you
it
uninteresting
would
if
be
you stopped
so
suffering.
uninteresting. And I like it, like my demons were the everything that was like my mental illness and all of this stuff. When I say my demons, I am talking about my mental illness. That's what made
Okay.
me work.
I, I,
That's what
I was
made
going to
me.
ask you,
Yeah.
would you be okay if like going into a little bit more detail about how those things manifested in you in particular, like what you would describe as your demons?
Yeah, um I deal with and have dealt with uh anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Um and it was one of those things where we're talking like the 90s, right? Like the early 90s when I first started feeling this. And I didn't know what it was. A lot of times, like, the way we were raised and the way like we were told. And it was funny because like a lot of the really, really damaging things that I was raised on like didn't come from my parents. It came from
Yeah.
like Sunday school and seminary and things like that. My parent, like when I look back and was like, well, did my parents ever tell me that like when I feel bad, that's because I lost the spirit? No, they never said that. But I heard that all the time. And so, when I'd feel sad, I'd be like, oh man, what I did. And my anxiety didn't really become a huge issue. Like I would get sad, I'd be down or whatever. But when I went on my mission, it just like rocketed. And I was sure that like it was because I was unworthy. And I
I think
had,
I think that's a very, very common experience for like young Mormon
yeah,
men too.
yeah. When you're
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you're
It's
told,
on your mission. You have all that stress, of being a missionary, and you have this thing where you've been taught it's not okay to feel bad, and
yeah,
suddenly,
it's not okay to feel bad. And when you offend the spirit leaves you, and you can feel it leave you. And so you're sitting there going, well, I'm certainly not feeling the spirit. And there were times when I was just like convinced that I had committed some major crime that I had blocked out, psychologically
mm,
blocked out. And I'd go and I'd like talk to my mission president. I would try to confess. I was reconfessing sins. Like going back over, like maybe I just didn't do it right the first time or the second time or whatever. And it wasn't until like 10 years after my mission that I was diagnosed with anxiety, um, and it was like, oh. And I remember I was talking to like my therapist, and he was like, and I was like, I really wish I would have known that on my mission, that I was like,
hmm
okay, that I wasn't like spiritually, betraying the Lord by being there and stuff like that. And
yeah. Let me just, if I can just say like real quickly, like that's one kind of funny. My dad just returned from being a mission president in
yeah,
Spain for 3 years, and it's like amazing how much that was a part of his job. Like heard so much from him. That was just a constant issue, was like dealing with mental illness
yeah,
of missionaries. And like they had a therapist that there was like a therapist that worked with their missionaries. They oftentimes had to figure out, medication. A lot of the stuff was diagnosed like on the mission. Like that was part of the process, was like diagnosing these missionaries, getting them counseling. And so they'd be doing counseling on the mission, getting them medication. And, sometimes they actually have to make the decision like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be out here. But so I think at the very least, maybe it's getting better for missionaries,
yeah.
but those resources definitely weren't there for.
No, I remember my sister right around this time that I got diagnosed with anxiety, my sister was on her mission and she was going through really bad. I actually suspect that my sister, my littlest sister, has like the closest mental illness to me. Like I have brothers, I have one brother who just deals with a lot of depression and stuff like that. But um, my little sister, her anxiety
Mm.
like manifests itself a lot in perfectionism. And so we were talking a lot while she was on her mission. I'd email her about this and be like, oh, I just got diagnosed with anxiety and stuff. And she just mentioned that, yeah, I'm seeing the mission, therapist, and I'm like, a mission therapist? Like, what the heck? Back when I was on my mission in 94, 96, it was
Yeah.
like mental illness did not exist. It did like therapist. If you went to therapist if you were like a juvenile delinquent, like who's and it and it just blows my mind that now, like I'll be talking with somebody and like now we talk about it, we're like, oh yeah, I went to a therapist or I'm going to a
Yeah.
therapist, and there's like no shame. There's not even a hesitation to even reveal that because I feel like it's so widespread. But back then, it is so like it was so. I
Mm.
feel like it was such a twisted up time, and you're just sitting there begging, praying, praying, praying
Hmm.
that you can understand why you feel this way and to stop this feeling this way. And I it was an interest. It's been an interesting thing, and I know that definitely like heavily influenced my creativity as I kind of went off into this creative world of like coming from feeling like I just spent 2 years unworthy on a mission, and like kind of blew my shot to like all the things that we feel like are promised to us if we serve missions and all this stuff, that, and then to kind of move on into like I mean, I would definitely say that like moving into a more creative era of my life was very therapeutic, but it was still like I said, I kind of protected my demons because I wanted to be tortured. I wanted to be, you know, um, like I wanted to have that grit and that edge, and that I feel like was missing in so many of my fellow Mormon
Yeah.
filmmakers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Of course, they were all everyone's dealing with their own demons, but from my perspective, I just felt like I wanted to, I needed to keep this like this horrible thing inside of me.
Yeah. And other people's way of dealing with that, I'm sure, is just like, oh, here's this thing I need to cover up or avoid or transform
Right,
or ignore or
right.
however everyone's dealing with in different ways. And your way was to kind of like put it in this special little, pocket and carry it around with you and, protect it in a certain way.
Yeah. And I'm sure that a lot of people deal with what they're dealing with by trying to make something incredibly righteous, like
Yeah.
trying to make something faith promoting. You know what I'm saying? Like if I'm going to feel this way, then I'm going to create this, and maybe that can be an offering to the Lord that will finally release me from this. I guarantee there've been people like that in
Oh,
all forms of
there's
art.
there's there's this phrase from I think Theodore Roosevelt where he says something along the lines of like his approach has always been to outrun his demons, and I think I'm sure I'm totally misquoting that, but I think that's very common within Mormon culture. The approach is like, okay, you gotta like outwork, you have to like outdo the demons, right? Like if you
Yeah.
constantly stay busy, if you do enough good things, that's gonna like be this purifying
You're kind of breaking
process.
up a little bit.
You hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
you're getting there. Well, say that. Say what you're saying my
I
last
was
thing.
just gonna say it's kind of that doing lots of good works is kind of this purifying process. So for a lot of
Right.
Mormons, there's very much this culture of like staying busy, being productive, accomplishing good things, accomplishing a lot of stuff. Busyness is very much a part of the culture.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, this is a very common thing I think with a lot of religions
Sure.
where um, an artist will see their ability to create as like some kind of chance at salvation. And
Absolutely.
like we have some incredibly beautiful works of art and stories and stuff like that because they had those opinions about themselves and about what they could accomplish. But um, I believe that in the end, it's just all untrue. Like it's not like you're not. Well, I probably should start back and just be saying like I saw this video of David Lynch talking about transcendental meditation, and it was very pivotal thing for me to get. Um, that video convinced me to like learn and practice transcendental meditation. But I saw it years and years and years before I ever actually did any like look it up. And one of the things that he talks about was he's just like you know anger, depression, like negativity, like are really good things for a story. Like you want the story to be dark and twisty and all these things, but they're like poison um, inside the artist.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically just says this idea of demons, like the demons are going to end up being a creative liability for you.
Yeah.
The more you hang on to these things, like yeah, they might motivate you to a degree, but at some point they're going to stop. They're going to stop you from creating.
Oh yeah.
And I was able to kind of look back on my own periods of time where I was like really suffering with these things, and I was very uncreative. Like I wasn't, like my moments of the greatest suffering don't equate to my moments of the greatest creation. And so I really started thinking about that, and I was like, I think he's right. I think that like to be a really functional artist, a storyteller, like you need to be a really functional person.
Yeah.
And you need to have this like you need to kind of be emotionally free enough to kind of move any point in life if you're going to tell a story. Like no character, no situation can be limited to you by your emotions if you're going to be a true storyteller. And I understood that mentally before I understood that, like long, long before I understood that emotionally.
Yeah. Are you saying,
And
just to make sure I understand you there, so you're kind of saying that like you have to be unencumbered emotionally and have some sort of like freedom emotionally just so you can explore kind of the variety and the diversity possible of just like experiences of different characters, to say like, oh, here's all these different points of
yeah,
views, all these different ways of looking at the world and feeling and thinking. And I need to be able to explore that without being too much encumbered by my own stuff, or if that makes sense, like emotional weight.
yeah. Well, and this is kind of jumping forward quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but when you're dealing with a lot of negativity
Mm-hmm.
and you're dealing with a lot of like just you know like pain in whatever version you're feeling, it clouds you and you cannot see. And also like one of the things that I learned when I was finally able to be free of this stuff was that we sit around and we define ourselves. We have these self definitions, and for the most part they're pretty negative.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like um, we used to always laugh at one of my friends because anytime in high school, anytime something bad happened to him, he would always say, "I always get screwed." And we would always laugh because it was a hilarious thing. Like, it's like, oh man, like, you know, Taco Bell is out of Taco Bell sauce. And he's like, I always get screwed. And it's a funny thing, but that was a belief, right? Like, that was a belief that he had that, like, things aren't going to turn out for him.
Yeah.
And when you have beliefs like this, and this could be anything, right? Like, it could be like things don't turn out for you, or nobody thinks you're important, or I'm always a failure, or all of these things, like
Yeah.
confirmation bias starts working on you, right? So like the times when my friend did get Taco Bell sauce at Taco Bell, he didn't say, you know what, I don't always get screwed. He never applies it to that. It's
Yeah.
only like it's only the beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're like that, and I feel like so many people are like that, where they have these self beliefs and you don't want, like, there are things that you secretly believe about yourself that you desperately don't want to be true, but you suspect are absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so if you suspect that you are not important, that no one thinks you're important, and all of a sudden somebody treats you like you're not important, like them's fighting words, like
Yeah.
that is a trigger, and you will get angry and you will hurt and you will thrash and stuff like that.
I think the one thing you have to be kind of careful about there is, at the same time, there's this kind of confirmation bias, but you also kind of just have to like recognize it's there. If you do have
Yes.
that part of you that thinks like, I always get screwed. I mean, I think the approach we can sometimes take is to be like, I need to start having more of a positive attitude. I got to change this negative attitude.
Right.
But the
Yes.
fact is, there's still that part of you. There's still that part of you that's really scared of that being reality, and you kind of have to acknowledge that. You can't, in
Yeah.
some way. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Pep talks to the opposite don't necessarily deal with the underlying belief,
Yeah.
right? That's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
Like, you can
exactly.
be like, no, I'm gonna have a good attitude. Well, whatever's dealing with, that belief is still there.
Yeah.
And so when you're a storyteller, when you're an artist, and your job is to observe the world and then hand it back to the world
Mm.
in a consumable format, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a poet is going to, like, see an experience, and then they're going to write a poem, and then we're going to read that poem and we recognize the truth because we're like, I know that experience, but you've put it in a beautiful way. You know what I'm saying? Every story, every piece of art, everything is kind of saying, like, hey, I've just observed this in the world, and here it is back. Even the really fantastic stuff, I
Yeah.
think, always harkens back, right? And so if you're an artist and you're a storyteller and your job is to observe the world and observe people and observe, like, and then like assimilate that and then create something with it, how can you do that when there are things that are triggering you to more pain? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you need to be able to, when somebody treats you like you're unimportant, you need to be able to stop and look at that person and understand why they would treat another person like that. And you can't do that if you're angry because that person just treated you like you're unimportant.
Yeah.
And so, like, in my, like, kind of journey from, like, understanding that, like, my demons are a liability, I kind of understood that, like getting rid of it's not just a liability, like getting rid of them and being able to see clearly, see people and see life clearly, that is an asset. That's going to make me much, much better a filmmaker because I'm seeing things, and I'm absorbing things, and I'm not rejecting anything because nothing threatens me, right? If you feel threatened by anything, like if you're threatened by, if you're a liberal who's threatened by conservative opinions, or a conservative who's threatened by liberal opinions, like, you're not seeing the picture. And so anything that threatens you blinds you.
I think there's I think there's something kind of interesting here that it seems, at least from what you're saying, that it's not just about like the thing itself. That's like the demon itself isn't necessarily like negative feelings, but it's also kind of how you relate to the negative feelings, right? Like it's
Right.
like not wanting to look
Right.
at them is kind of the thing that's really causes the problem, or accept
Yes.
them.
And the reason we don't look at things is because we have a belief inside of us. We have an incorrect belief inside of us that doesn't want, doesn't want any kind of confirmation. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of times when people are like, I can't talk about that, I don't want to talk about that, it's like usually because that's threatening something that they believe about themselves that they don't like,
Yeah.
you know. And that might be an oversimplified statement, but I think it's kind of getting at the roots of what's going on with people. And I know that like a lot of my learning about this stuff is me looking at stuff and going, okay. So a lot of times now, if something makes me upset, like um, if something triggers that, then I can stop and say, okay, why? Like, what belief system in me am I maintaining that is making me upset that, you know, they didn't do my notes on the film I'm working on and kind of did something else. Like, why does that bother me? Because before that used to be like, you know, something that would be just devastating because I was defining myself with those things. But now now I can kind of say, like, that doesn't define me. My last project doesn't define me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that has nothing to do with my worth. And you can start like my last, just like full disclosure, the film that I just directed isn't turning out the way I'm hoping it to turn out.
Yeah.
And it's been very disappointing. It's been a very disappointing like last couple of weeks
Hmm.
to see like us work so hard to get this filmed a certain way and then just have it like go off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
But I think 2 years ago, this would have caused me to have like an emotional breakdown. This would have had just like absolute like anxiety and panic attacks and all this stuff. And now I'm okay with it because first off, I was hired to direct a movie for somebody. It's their movie. They're paying for it. Like they have every right to make every choice that they made. Um, they are happy with the movie. They're happy with me. These are things that I can say, okay, let's, like that's good. The other thing is I had a total blast making this. Up until like 2 weeks ago, this was something that I really enjoyed. And just because it didn't turn out at the last second doesn't mean that the enjoyment that I got, the fulfillment that I got was any, like negated in any way, right? Like it was a really fun project. I really enjoyed making it. It didn't turn out the way I wanted to. That doesn't ruin all of the good stuff, right? And
Yeah.
so that was kind of like, but there are these little, like you're saying, like I'm not devoid of bad feelings, but I try to use my bad feelings as like red flags to kind of cue me in on what's going on inside me.
Yeah.
So I
They're usually
can
pretty good
say like,
signs of like areas to investigate, you know?
exactly, exactly. Like I was starting to use this film to define myself.
Hmm.
That was why I was getting mad that no one was listening to my notes.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden afterwards, I'm like, okay, but this doesn't define me. I'm so much more than just a filmmaker, and I'm so much more than just this project.
Yeah.
And like it's legitimately disappointing, and I can't just sweep those away. But
Sure.
I'm also like I can put them in perspective.
Dude, that's such a big issue, I think, being an artist. And part of the problem is just making art. Maybe I'm seeing this wrong. Maybe this is true of other types of jobs, but I feel like it's especially true with art that it's you have your identity gets so wrapped up with it. And so when you do a job, especially when it's a job for someone else, like you want your voice to be in that thing,
Yeah,
right? And I had
yeah,
that was an issue all the time for me working with games, and I think I had a really hard time like letting that go and being like, dude, I'm putting together some really awesome stuff. It's getting rejected, and having that feeling like you're getting your voice, stamped out and trying to be able to let that go
yeah,
and to be like, okay, look, this work is not me. You want this thing to validate you to show you, prove that you're okay, that you're whatever, a good person or a worthwhile person. But being able to say like, there's part of me I don't have to define myself as an artist. I don't have to define myself with this work. It is possible just to like do a job, get paid to do a job.
yeah. And I think one of the things that we do as artists is we get so result oriented that we forget that we got into it because we loved the everydayness, right? So, like a lot of times I can say, oh man, this isn't turning out, this isn't working. I wanted to be here, I wanted to be here. But now, lately, I've just been like, okay, Cole, like, you chose this because you love it, and you love it because you love what you get to do every single day.
Yeah.
Like, don't throw that out. Don't throw that out just because you write a screenplay that you loved writing and it never gets made.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that doesn't matter. You wrote a screenplay that you loved writing, and every day you get to do something awesome. And as long as, like, I try to keep these, like, I don't want to call it a vision board, but I have like a collection of things that, like, sometimes I'll look at them every day.
Do you like cut out like letters from magazines and have them spell inspirational words?
Make like ransom letters and stuff?
No, like inspirational words like love, motivation, friends.
No, not that. But I do have like an album in my photos that I'll go through, and they'll be saying stuff. And one I just made was called "Work is its own reward." Right? Like it's so easy for me to forget that, because I am so, like, I'm a very results oriented person, and I just think, I wake up and I'm like, I got this, and this. I'm like, no, you get to do this. Do you love doing that? Yeah, you get to go do that. Like, how great is this? Who cares if anything ever gets made, or if it does get made, it turns out horrible or whatever, because I get to do work that is rewarding in and of itself.
Well, this is something I was chatting in my other discussion with Jersey the other day, that there is this vulnerability that I think is kind of peculiar to art, where artists, I think, feel like they constantly have to justify themselves to the outside world, to the non-art world. Right. And so when you don't have something that you can, like, show, and whether it's money or whether it's some sort of, like, product that's, like, exactly how you want it to be, then we start getting concerned about, like, okay, how are responsible people going to think of me, if I don't have something to show for what I've been doing as an artist.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing, because it really shouldn't have that much to do. You know what I'm saying? Like somebody could make, like someone could be a chef, like they prepare food, right? They could love doing that. But that food is going to be consumed, and, like, there's not a lot to show for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you need to stop and say, well, where's the value? At what point is there value? Is the value in the fact that there used to be a mill, but now it's gone? Mm-hmm. Or is it in the preparation, or is it in the, what I'm saying? Like, and that's a really interesting, like, where does the value of art begin? And, I would argue that it's in the doing. It's in the, like, hopefully you love it. And I know certain people who are like, they love having made a movie, or they love having written a book, or you know what I'm saying, but they don't love doing it. And I really hope those people are super successful, because, man, they're getting nothing out of it.
Yeah.
Unless they are successful, right? But
I honestly, I would say that the balance does fall on both. Like, I really, really enjoy finishing something that's difficult, but there certainly are times in the process where I'm like, yeah, I'm not having fun right now.
Right. Right. And that's something that I've realized, is that there's, like, this weird, like, I've talked with filmmakers who there's a grind for sure, right? Yeah. There's a grind for every art. You got to grind it out. You remember the old
Guillermo del Toro quote we both heard live at Comic-Con that one year, right?
Is it the everyone can quit the film industry but you?
No. The one that's saying, where he said, like, making a movie is like eating a sandwich made out of shit. Sometimes there's a little bit more shit. Sometimes there's a little bit less. But there's always shit.
Yeah. There's always. Yeah. That is a great one.
I remember us just like in tears watch it, like everything you would say every other minute was just something that was just like so hilarious and like
Yeah.
inappropriate.
Was that the Pan's Labyrinth
Yeah.
uh, panel? Yeah, because that's the one. Like a lot of people are like, "What's the best advice you've ever gotten?" I'm like, Guillermo del Toro once told me in a panel there were like 1,000 people there, and he told just me that everyone can quit the film industry except you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I share that with my classes and stuff like that, where I'm like, think about that, like make that decision.
Yeah.
That's where you're gonna
The other
you can quit when everybody else quits.
the other great line he said from that, talking about Pan's Labyrinth, is he's like, "Oh, there's so many beautiful images in this. You're gonna watch it and you're gonna go into the corner and masturbate and cry."
Yeah, I remember that. That was funny. You were there.
Anyway, sorry, little tangent, but
Yeah, no problem. What were we talking about?
work, like doing the work,
Yeah,
the
like
satisfaction that
yeah,
comes from doing the work, producing the work.
and there's a lot of satisfaction, and sometimes I'll try to explain that to people where they're just like, man, if things don't happen for me, if things don't happen for me this year, then I don't know if I'm going to continue doing this.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, do you like writing scripts?
Yeah.
Because if the answer is yes, then you're not going to give up. But if you are just kind of good at it, but you hate doing it, then but going back to what you're saying, I do love finishing things, and I love having something to show, and I love
Yeah.
when that thing creates opportunities and adoration and
It's nice.
congratulations for me.
It's nice to have a group of peers that appreciate the work that you do. Like that's really helpful to be able. I mean, for me, like finishing Green Monk, I didn't make very much money from that, but it's like I did get respect from peers and peers that I respect for finishing it. So that's very satisfying.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah. I
nice.
mean, and I do think that there should always be some validation and some emotional reward
Yeah.
for completing a project. Like that needs to always be, like, there's always satisfaction, right? Like, you work really hard washing the dishes, and all of a sudden you have a clean
Yeah.
kitchen, and then you walk out of the kitchen, you walk back in the kitchen, and you're just like, oh yeah, I did the dishes. Like, yeah, like that's legit, right? Like that is valid, you know, reward there. But it's easy to think that that's all there is
Yeah.
in the value of creating, is to have a finished product and then have that product be successful.
Yeah, the fight,
Where
the experience in the fight. This is one thing I really like about let's say Inside Llewyn Davis,
yeah.
which, speaking of like fear, like that was a movie when I initially read about it, it's like I don't want to see that because it's like, oh, here's this movie in the log line that's about a failed artist, and I can remember that
Yeah,
feeling
yeah.
of like I don't think I can handle that, and it's become one of my most like loved Coen Brothers films because it's
Yeah.
very much about like, no, it's in that film is very much about like, no, it's about the struggle, it's about the fight, it's about humping through like a bunch of snow to go to some recording session, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely something about that. Like when you go on an adventure, part of the adventure is that you're fighting dragons and that you're crossing deserts, and it's
Yeah.
it's the struggle is part of the adventure, and that's what makes getting that treasure at the end of it worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think certain people, you and I obviously, but a lot. I mean, I think most artists are people who can see the value of that, of grinding, and of like maybe the challenge, the fight in its of itself, blow by blow, isn't fun, but there's a satisfaction that comes from it, like above all of it. That there was one time when I did a film, uh, and then we did like a director's cut, a short film, and something happened with the proxies, and the proxies got disconnected, and so I had to go through the whole entire thing. It was like 30-minute long short, and like by hand reconnect it back to the source footage. And I will tell you right now, that was not fun. Like it was so tedious, and it was just like my body started just getting like muscle memory, of like what I was doing, and it was just so mindlessly, But I love filmmaking so much that I'm worth it. And some guy walks in and he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, this happened, and we're doing this." He's like, "Is it worth it?" And I'm all, "Yeah." Like, I already put effort into this film.
Yeah.
Like, I'm already going to put some more effort in. I think there's people who understand that. There's other people who are just like, "Ew, gross." Like, I don't want to like, I like certain things about film, but I don't like, like doing budgets or doing the accounting or whatever like that, and the stuff
Yeah.
that's kind of more grindy.
So I have this question about that, or observation, and maybe this will get us back to Camus and see how that ties into everything. But
Yeah.
so here's the question. We talk about the grind and how like, yeah, the grind's worth it. And at the end of the day, there's this, but at the same time, I've definitely experienced for myself that there are times when the grind has been very soul crushing, where I've like really struggled and struggled and struggled. And I can feel like the result of that is burnout, just feeling like
Right.
I'm
The
done.
only reward you have is soul destruction.
Yeah. And so I think there can be this unhealthy thing where the grind can kind of feed something unhealthy as well. And so maybe this gets us back to like the Invincible Summer idea, because there definitely can be this experience that I've had of making art and trying to make art where it's just been a very difficult process, and where it feels like it doesn't feel like there's a momentum. It feels like the momentum is sometimes going, at least in the past, like the momentum is going in the opposite direction. The harder I try, the more I work, the more I do, the less I'm wanting to do this, and just feeling like, oh, I'm so sick of like having to feel like I need to sketch in a sketch pad every day or whatever it is. Or like I'm supposed to be like reading. I'm supposed to be reading. I'm supposed to be watching movies and reading comics. And I'm just like, I'm so exhausted with doing that. I'm just done with doing that,
Yeah.
So I don't know. Does that kind of feed into and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but we do need to talk about the Invincible Summer at some point and how that came to be.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea because, like you look at somebody like take like a boxer, right? Somebody who's trying to be a boxer. And I remember there's in my little album that I look at, there's a quote from Muhammad Ali, and he talks about how he's like, I hated training. I hated every second of training. But, I told myself to, suffer now and be a champion later, which is very, very results oriented.
Yeah.
Right. But there is some legitimately like painful things about being a boxer. And in a way that like, if somebody told me like, I enjoy every aspect of being a boxer, I'd be like,
yeah,
like I have a hard time taking that at face value. But there are people who love boxing, right?
Yeah.
They love it, and they would never give it up. And because of that, it's like they're willing to go through the grind. They're willing to go through the horribleness. And I look at that like, reassembling my whole film by hand was like that, where it was like, yeah, this is one of the horrible parts, but I would not trade being a filmmaker right now. I still would, like I love it. This is what I love to do, even though there's a part like, talking about like Guillermo del Toro's Sandwich, right? Like there's just going to be a part where like,
yeah,
it's going to be worse.
So my question is that kind of thing that you love being a filmmaker and you're grateful for doing it, is that like the Invincible Summer for you, or is that part of it, or is it something else?
I've never associated with those two things. I just kind of, like if we're going to get back to the narrative of my finding this Invincible Summer.
Oh, okay.
Because because I was kind of doing that before when I was like suffering from, and like main protecting and even sometimes like nourishing my demons.
Yeah.
Um, I still had that like willingness to grind stuff out. Um, but it wasn't until it was. I mean, it's a weird, and I'll tell this. Trying to think how do I tell this story, but I basically just had this really really profound moment that I think of as like this epiphany, um, and it was something where I a lot of things were happening in my life where I was kind of thinking about like how good people were and how good I was and how that's really kind of just a perception of that person and a perception of myself. And I was right before I had this epiphany, I was working on a screenplay, trying to get it ready for I was going to submit it to a film festival and see if see how I could do on that. And I was polishing it up and I paid my submission fee and I hit submit and I thought I probably won't get in. And then I was like, you just spent like not even counting like how much you spent on that writing that screenplay, but you just spent like 2 days polishing it up and getting it ready, and you just spent like $60 to submit. Also, you can think I probably won't get in. And I started thinking about like again, that was kind of like, I mean, I probably won't get in is very similar to I always get screwed, right? Where I'm like, yeah, like why did I say that? Well, I tend to not get into these types of things. And I'm like, well, like what, you've gotten into film festivals.
Yeah, like
Why
how
are
about
you
Sundance?
saying,
Was that not good
yeah,
enough for evidence of?
yeah, why do I have this belief that like things don't work out for me, and at that moment, it just kind of a lot of things in my life just culminated to that moment where I was like, my whole life I've heard that I should like myself, that I should love myself. And I feel like I've always been given really convincing arguments why I should love myself, but I've always dismissed it as something that was just outside of my ability to understand and to do. And I was like, maybe like I need to like do this for real, like go in and figure this out. Um, and like, long story short, like I had this huge epiphany where I just understood how to, love myself. And for a long time, I'd talk about, oh yeah, when I learned to love myself, but like what it really was just gaining the ability to accept myself
Yeah.
and not say like, oh yeah, you're pretty good, except XYZ did this. If you could change these things, man, you'd be cherry, right? But instead, it's like you're good right now. Like you are good right now, and that self acceptance. Like I used to talk about it as like self love or self compassion, but really, it's to me, it's a lot clearer as like self acceptance
Yeah.
is the invincible summer, right? Like that's
Yeah.
this. It's weird because like I started seeing all these things. I could see like the gears of what was going on inside of me, and I could see that like when I would start reading about it, I started realizing that like people have been talking about this for thousands of years, right? Like in transcendental meditation, they talk about like the unified field, and Buddhism talks about it one thing, and like all these people, like I started, I started. What I did was I created these terms for myself, and I realized that like you have the invincible summer, and it's always there. That's the crazy thing is like I didn't like, yep, I finally got my invincible summer. No, I found it. It was
It was always
always there.
there.
It was like, yeah, it was like, something that just got buried, but it's there.
That's That's so interesting that you say that. I mean, because I was curious about how you're going to answer that. But that's really one of the things that's been kind of a discovery for me as well. And this is one way you look at like meditation practice, and specifically all the type of practices you can kind of clump into this like mindfulness whole area. And that's really what they're all about, is like cultivating the ability to accept things as exactly as they are. So I did a coaching session with a meditation teacher named Kenneth Folk, who's one of the more like prominent teachers within like pragmatic Dharma. And he kind of had this phrase where he's like, he has this thought experiment. So, and it goes like this. You ask like, are things anything different than they are? No. Are things exactly as they are? Yes. I think I told this to you before. And it's so obvious. It's like the most obvious thing. But when he said it, he's just like, are things any different than they are right now? No. Are they exactly as they are? Yes. It sounds so obvious, but I think there's something there. But I do think it's more than just this mental exercise of being like, oh, acceptance, because it can sound like this very trite thing. Even saying the Invincible Summer can sound like this very trite thing.
Yeah, for sure.
That, there's something, there's a slimmer of hope somewhere there. But I think if you are very serious about that, and you want like happiness, which I think is a very worthwhile goal to look for, like there's like practice and there's like work that needs to be done to get there, and that's a lot of what I think about meditation. I think that's what it's doing, that it's just like, I have to practice over and over and over again this process of accepting what is. And it's hard because there's a lot of subtle things. The more you do it, the more you see like, wow, there's all these very subtle, hard to see ways that I'm resisting what is.
Yeah. And then, and then it's so interesting. It's so interesting to compare the desire to create to the acceptance of what is. You know what I'm saying?
That's
because
interesting.
those feel counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Either you accept what is, or you create something different.
Yeah.
And I have found that they're not so creative and they're not so counterintuitive, but
That's
they
interesting.
seem like they you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like an acceptance of what is empowers you to create.
Okay,
to,
explain this a little bit, because I've kind of been taking
better.
I've been taking a little bit of a creative hiatus lately, so I feel like I've been good at accepting lately, but I haven't been doing a ton of creating. So maybe just talk about it and see if something comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could understand it better, but I just know that, like, okay, going back to talking about people who don't, they're people who just really don't like the grind of creativity.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think about a lot, and sometimes I say it and sometimes I don't, when people are talking about, oh man, like it takes so long. I don't want to write my screenplay, or I don't want to write my novel because it's going to take so long. And like, my response is always like, that time is going to pass anyway.
Yeah.
Like,
I've had that same thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, let's say 2 months, it takes you 2 months to write a screenplay. Mm-hmm. In 2 months, you can either have a screenplay or you can be exactly how you are right now for writing wise, right? Like, I'm sure there's some progression. But a lot of times when people say like how hard things are going to be or how long they're going to take, I'm just like, that this is all, like, all the resources that you think you're saving by not doing it are passing anyway.
Yeah.
So like, what does that have to do with like acceptance for creativity? But I think that is like the time is going to pass anyway. Mm-hmm. Like, you can accept things as they are, but things are going to be passing. Time is going to be passing. Your strength is going to be passing. Your focus is going to be passing. These things cannot be saved in a savings account. And so why not create what is? But a lot of things is like, we're talking about recognizing what we can change and accepting the things that we can't, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things we can change is we can create. What we cannot change, what we do not have control about, is how that thing we create is being received.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we have this like, sorry, the dog barking.
Well, I've got like kids running all over my house, so it's
totally
fine. Hey, by the way, you gonna chase down the dog?
She's gonna. I think she's almost done barking. She usually doesn't bark
okay.
too long.
I was just gonna say that along those lines is you would kind of think from Buddhism they would be all just about like accepting and whatever and letting whatever happen. There's kind of interesting stories within like the early Buddhist suttas where you have a pretty common theme of people coming to the Buddha and being like, hey, I don't know when I'm going to die, so I want you to teach this stuff to me now so I can get this before I die. You know, and the Buddha at first would be like, I don't have time for this, but they convince him because they're like, this is urgent, this is important, I'm going to die, I need to know this before I die. You know, and even the Buddha, I think this might have been, you know, at least reported, his final words were something like strive diligently for your salvation. And so it's okay. You got to find a balance in that because you can also drive yourself crazy worrying about accomplishing enough in life, but there is an urgency of if you can hold it lightly enough, there's this urgency that, you know, we have a limited amount of time. Time's going to pass either way. So, you know, what are you going to do with the time you are given to make it worthwhile?
And if you look at it like that way, creativity is not a rejection of how things are, but it is being part of the flow of how things will be, right?
Yeah.
So let's say you just say, like, if you're sitting there and you're like, you know what? I don't like my life. I don't like the way it is. I want to make it better. I want to I'm going to write like the next Harry Potter and my life is going to be better. That is not accepting how things are. You know, you can sit there and go, you know what? Yeah, like I got trials, but I have all these things going for me. And because of that, tomorrow I'm going to write. You know, tomorrow I'm going to use my time to write because that time is going to pass anyway.
Yeah, there is a sense too of it being like creativity is kind of an acceptance of who you are in a sense, and also like it's an acceptance of the fact that there is this imaginary world that exists inside of us, and taking responsibility for like loving that and saying like, okay, this is good enough, this is worthwhile enough and beautiful enough that I'm going to do the work to express what is the truth of my imaginary world to other people.
Yeah.
You know, it shows kind of love for yourself to say like, this is worth showing to other people, even though there's obviously a time delay. You imagine things in a certain way and then, you know, it takes 10 years for that to actually get out for other people to see it, you know? But I think it can kind of be summed up like tomorrow is going to build itself. Yeah.
With or without me. So I might as well be part of it, right? Like I'm going to go and build tomorrow with everyone else in my own way by writing, you know? And maybe you don't, and you accept that too. Like you accept that yesterday I did not contribute to yesterday as well as, and that's fine. You don't need to.
You know, there's really one of the tricks I think for acceptance is, I mean, I don't know like where you fall on the whole idea of free will, whether we have free will or not. From people that talk about doing lots and lots of meditation, like very long-term meditators, they seem to kind of have a consensus that free will is kind of an illusion. So, I mean, until I experience that myself, I don't really know. But I do think there's kind of a benefit sometimes as a practice of acceptance to kind of treat your life as if it's a movie you're watching rather than something you're doing. And that doesn't mean doing nothing. I mean, you will still do things, but to kind of sit back and just be like, okay, I'm not the one controlling this. Like there's no one in charge. Just pretend there's no one in charge and just kind of watch your life, sit back and watch your life. And cause I think we have a lot of the stress and strain and anxiety is this strain of like, I need to make my life a certain way. I have to force it in a certain
Right.
direction. And I think if you can kind of sit back and be like, let's watch it. Let's watch this movie. And, you know, it's funny. You'll still do stuff even when you're sitting back and you aren't like trying to force yourself to do X, Y, Z. You'll still do stuff, and it can still be kind of fun and interesting and active and creative. So maybe that's another thing to try.
I think that kind of goes into, like, I like that idea of just being like, you know, I really do think that certain things are just going to happen, right? Like, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis was like the break, and you know, it's easy to think like, whoa, we just got, or it's like, or you know, that like nuclear war is not supposed to happen right then, right? Like, it's easy to look at it. It's easy to look at life like that, where like, especially in retrospect, right?
Yeah.
When you look back and you're like, okay, like, whoa, do you see it? You know, do you see how that almost happened? But it didn't, because it wasn't supposed to, you know?
Yeah.
And it's easy to do that with your life, but you know, if you're sitting there and you think that something else should be happening with your life, you're going to be blinded to the things you got going on. You know,
that's a really good point.
Truly, what do you say?
That's a really good point. Yeah, just like you kind of
gratitude.
miss the opportunities, because you can be so overly focused. And I mean, goals are good and stuff, but there is kind of a point where you can be so laser focused on kind of one path that you miss the periphery, and you see like all the opportunities out in the periphery, you know? And where if you can relax and sit back a bit and let things go a little bit, life can be a little bit more about like, okay, what's arising? What's happening here? Like what's available? And you can kind of, it's much more like surfing. I think the older I get, the more I think that surfing is like a really great metaphor for how you live life, because it's not simply, I mean, a surfer is not just some dude bobbing in the water, getting carried around in waves, right? Like there's a certain amount of skill and balance, and actually a very high level of skill to be a surfer, and to kind of figure out how to stay afloat and how to navigate the wave. Yeah. But at the same time, that wave is having a big effect on what the circumstance and what the direction of that experience is going to be, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of accepting that like there's all this stuff I can't control, and kind of finding a way to really skillfully navigate that and enjoy that, and not try to like control the path of the wave, you know, however it manifests in your life.
Yeah. Like it's easy to want to be a fighter pilot who can just like fly across the country in, you know, minutes, but you're not, you're a surfer. and you got to like deal with like how good the waves are that day. You know, how I'm like, I think we've been hearing this a ton during this quarantine of like, you know, you can't control your situation, but you can control how you respond to it. And I've just been hearing that over and over and over and over since this all started. And it's interesting just because like, you know, that's not a quarantine thing. That's like everything. You just need to be accepted. And like for me, you know, there was a time when it used to really bother me that I didn't live in a house. You know, like I live in an apartment and I don't have a house. And it just really, you know, really bothered me that I was, you know, this far along in life and I didn't own a house and all this stuff. And then one day I realized that like I actually have a pretty awesome apartment. And not only that, but I get to live in this apartment with my two favorite people, my wife and my little girl.
You guys are in a great location. You guys, I know you guys pay like a really good rent, so to be where you are.
Like there's so many good things about that situation.
Yeah.
But just because like I was raised to believe that like, you know, like once you're out of if you don't own a house by the time you're out of your 30s, then you're a menace to society. I don't know what the definite, but there was just like some kind
You're
of shame put onto it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just total, like, it's total BS. Like, this is just, like, everyone has things in their life that they can be grateful for. And like, if you start looking at those things, you can get like amped about your life because you're like, yeah, I am healthy and I am like, yeah, I don't make enough money. I'm in debt, all this stuff. But like, I have X, Y, and Z going on for me.
Yeah.
And I think that like, that's kind of it, like going back to what we were talking about with, like accepting and creating and stuff like that is like, instead of being like, I want to change how things are, you're like, I have an opportunity right now to create, and I will love, like, I have 30 minutes. I have 30 minutes to work on my script. And I'm grateful for that 30 minutes because I love writing scripts and I get to have 30 minutes of doing what I love.
Yeah.
Will that script ever been made? Who knows? That's too far down the road to think about. Right now, there's like, you're accepting what's happening. You're accepting the day as it is. And the day has provided you an opportunity to create. So you create. Like that's, and you get joy out of that creativity. I think that's, out of that creativity, I think that's what is like the Zen way of approaching, your life and creativity and your pursuits. And instead of being like, I must dominate and twist reality to my will.
Yeah.
You're a surfer. You're just like, oh, sweet. This wave is me creating right now. Next wave is going to be me, hanging out with my family. The next wave is going to be me doing the dishes. I don't like doing the dishes so much, so it's not that great of a wave, but it's still surfing.
Yeah.
And I still dig it,
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's all I have to say about that.
You can't actually end talking, Cole. That's not how you work. You just keep going.
Just like, and I'm out of words.
Well, that's cool, man. Well, maybe that's a good place for us to kind of wrap up for today. So, I think we hit most of the themes we usually cover when we sit down and chat. So that's nice. I'm sure we can dig up some other topics next time we do this. So
no, it's just go find your Invincible Summer. Oh, that reminds me. I remember I found a quote by Rumi that said, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. And that for me, like getting access to my Invincible Summer was exactly that. Like my Invincible Summer was there and I had like trash and debris and, like stuff in the way. And I just had to go I had to like wipe it all off and get it off before I could really be there. But it's not like I invented it. It wasn't created within me. It wasn't like, it was something that was always there. And I found it.
You've been listening to How to Be an Artist. To support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/H2BNA.